She was left for someone younger in the divorce. Her response made him beg for forgiveness. The restaurant was dimly lit, elegant, and quiet, exactly the kind of place they'd celebrated their wedding anniversaries in for nearly 2 decades. But this time, something felt different. The way he stirred his wine, the distance in his eyes, and the forced smile he wore between every polite sentence. She noticed it all. For 18 years, they'd shared life, laughter, and losses. And now, on what should have been another tender milestone, his silence hung heavier than any words could. She had worn the burgundy dress he used to love, even curled her hair like she did in their early days. Still, he didn't notice. Or perhaps he did, and that was the point, he didn't care to say it. She tried to bring up old memories, vacations they'd taken, their daughter's childhood moments, even their first date at a rundown coffee shop. He laughed politely at the right cues, nodded at the rest, but his eyes kept shifting, toward the clock, the door, and anything else but her. When dessert came, untouched and melting on the plate, he took a deep breath. "We need to talk," he said flatly, like a doctor delivering unwanted test results. Her stomach dropped before he even said the words. Somehow, deep down, she already knew this wasn't just another fight. She didn't touch her wine again that night. The sweetness had soured. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice devoid of remorse. "You're just not exciting anymore. I don't mean that to be cruel. I need more." She blinked, stunned, as if slapped in public. Of all the things she imagined, stress, depression, a midlife crisis, nothing prepared her for this emotional amputation disguised as a conversation. The woman who'd stood by him through 3 job changes, his father's death, and the endless late nights building his startup from nothing was now not exciting. She struggled to speak, but her mouth refused cooperation. Her heart thudded so loud she couldn't hear herself think. He continued, casually now, like unloading groceries. "There's someone else. It's not just about her, it's about me too. I feel alive with her." That sentence shattered whatever hope she had left. Not only was she being discarded, but replaced. She felt every eye in the restaurant on her, though no one was watching. She imagined getting up and screaming, flipping the table, or crying, but she did none of those things. Instead, she swallowed the pain, smiled stiffly, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." Not because she meant it, but because she didn't want to give him the dignity of seeing her fall apart. At least, not yet. Weeks later, while trying to keep her routine normal, she stopped at the grocery store after work. Her cart barely had anything in it, bananas, yogurt, and bread, because appetite was a foreign concept now. That's when she saw them. Him, laughing, pushing a cart with confidence he never had with her. And beside him, a woman who looked like she could be their daughter's older sister. Slim, radiant, and dressed like she was always ready for a photo shoot. Her hand rested casually on his arm as they browsed the wine aisle, completely unaware of the woman frozen 2 feet away. It was like watching a dream unravel in reverse. She hadn't expected to meet the other woman so soon, certainly not in the organic produce section. But there she was, looking exactly how the cliché always did, young, effortlessly chic, and full of the kind of flirty laughter that made her feel ancient. For a split second, their eyes met. The younger woman smiled, unsure, probably thinking she was just another shopper. But he looked horrified. His jaw clenched, and she saw him shift ever so slightly in front of the woman, as if trying to shield her from his past. That was the final dagger. In that moment, she realized she had become a chapter he was trying to close and erase. It wasn't enough that he left her. He needed to announce it, publicly, confidently, as if it were something to celebrate. A few weeks later, she was invited to a former mutual friend's dinner party. She almost didn't go, but she needed to feel normal again, even if for one evening. The house was grand, filled with polite laughter and soft jazz. Wine flowed, and everyone looked as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. That's when he walked in, arm in arm with the new woman, like a politician parading his success story. All eyes turned. Conversations paused. Her throat tightened, but she stood firm. And then he said it. "Everyone, this is Eliza. I think some of you already know, but I've finalized my divorce." Some guests exchanged awkward glances. Others raised their eyebrows and muttered "oh" under their breath. She didn't say a word, just sipped her wine and smiled as if she were amused by a joke only she understood. Someone whispered, "Isn't that his ex-wife over there?" It didn't matter. What mattered was that he wanted attention, and to humiliate her quietly by pretending he had traded up. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but not from shame. No, it was the early stirring of something else, something stronger than pain. Returning to work should have felt like reclaiming her space, but instead, it became another battlefield. Whispers followed her like shadows. Even the HR manager, with her tight bun and too sweet smile, avoided direct eye contact. Colleagues pretended nothing had changed, yet they spoke to her with either too much sympathy or hollow cheer. She could feel the undertone in every hallway greeting, like people were waiting for her to break down. She hated it. She wasn't a wounded animal, and yet that's how they saw her, fragile, pitted, and possibly unstable. Then came the lunchroom moment that confirmed it all. A younger intern, unaware of how thin the walls were, gossiped at full volume to a coworker. She got left for someone, like, half his age? That's brutal. I'd quit if I were her. Another replied, "She looks tired lately." I'd die of embarrassment. She stood frozen in the hallway, the tray in her hand shaking. But instead of crying, she walked in, smiled, and sat at the same table. She said nothing, just ate her lunch slowly. The interns fell silent, faces red. That was her first small act of defiance. And it felt good. Very good. The divorce proceedings were as clinical as a boardroom transaction. No emotion, no acknowledgement of shared history. He walked in with a lawyer far younger than theirs had ever been, sharp suit, smug smile, and documents prepared to strip her of more than just property. He wanted the house, the car, even pieces of furniture she'd picked out. What should have been a fair division became a cold attempt at erasure. She watched him sign away their past like he was discarding an old subscription. Every clause felt like a slap. "He really wants the painting from the hallway?" she asked her attorney in disbelief. "Yes," the attorney replied, "he claims it was a gift from his mother, not a joint purchase." She stared at the document and laughed bitterly. That painting had been something they bought on a trip to Maine, after a silly fight they'd resolved by sharing a slice of pie. Now he wanted even that memory sanitized. Fine, she thought. Let him have it. Let him take the things. But he wouldn't take her sense of self. Her birthday came 3 weeks after the settlement. No calls, no flowers, not even a polite message from the man who used to write poems on cards he hid in her sock drawer. She didn't expect anything from him, but the silence still stung. It wasn't about the gifts, it was about the erasure. He had rewritten her role in his story, as if their life together had never mattered. She spent the day alone, walking through the botanical gardens they once visited together. The flowers were in full bloom, but they only made her feel more out of season. Later that evening, she returned home to an empty apartment filled with packed boxes she hadn't yet unpacked. A neighbor knocked and offered her leftover birthday cake from her son's party. "You're welcome to have a slice if you'd like," the woman said kindly. She took it with a smile, thanked her, and cried the moment she closed the door. Eating that cake with her hands, sitting on the floor of a room she hadn't decorated yet, she whispered to herself, "You're still here. You're still standing." Somehow, that became her first candlelight vigil to herself. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the knock came. She opened the door to find an older woman, small-framed, hair silver, holding a thick envelope. "You don't know me," the woman began, "but I knew your grandmother." She introduced herself as Miriam, a neighbor from years ago, and explained that before passing, her grandmother had left a letter she'd promised to deliver personally. The envelope was worn, sealed with wax, and smelled faintly of lavender. She hadn't thought of her grandmother in years, not since the funeral. Curious and cautious, she invited the woman in. Miriam sat on the edge of the couch and sipped tea while she talked about old stories, how her grandmother was a painter, a dreamer, and how she always said her granddaughter had the same fire in her eyes. "She said you'd need this someday," Miriam said, placing the envelope in her hands. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, along with a sketch of a little girl drawing under a tree. "Never forget who you are," it read. "You are not what is lost. You are what remains." Tears spilled freely. This wasn't just a memory, it was a spark reignited. She read the letter 3 times that night. Every word felt like balm on cracked skin. Her grandmother spoke of heartbreak, resilience, and starting over after her own marriage had ended decades earlier. "Men sometimes fall for flash," she wrote, "but flash fades fast. Substance, child, that's what endures." In the margins were sketches of flowers, tiny birds, and a small sun with smiling rays. It was whimsical and wise, just like she remembered her grandmother being. She slept with the letter under her pillow, like a child clutching a lifeline in the dark. The next morning, she framed the sketch and placed it on her empty kitchen counter. It stood alone, defiant, beautiful, just like she now aspired to be. She sat with her coffee and stared at it for a long time, not with sadness, but with purpose. The words "you are what remains" echoed in her mind as she opened her laptop. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in weeks, she wanted to find out. Not to escape the past, but to create something in spite of it. Or maybe because of it. She started with the junk drawer. Pens that no longer worked, expired coupons, batteries that rolled endlessly in their compartment. One by one, she sorted through the remnants of a life paused. Then it was the hallway closet, then the living room shelves. She cleaned like a woman possessed, not because the apartment was dirty, but because her mind needed space. Each item thrown out felt like a small act of liberation. She found receipts from restaurants they used to love, cards he'd written, dried roses she forgot to discard. Into the trash they went. No ceremony. Just peace. Eventually, she reached the last untouched box from the move. Inside was a dusty sketchbook, nearly untouched since her 20s. She flipped through the pages and saw herself again, not the wife or the ex-wife, but the artist. The one who dreamed of illustrating children's books. The one who once painted her emotions in brushstrokes of blue and gold. She stared at a blank page and, for the first time in years, picked up a pencil. Her hand trembled, but the first line came easily. Then another. Then another. And just like that, the dust began to clear. She didn't tell anyone what she was working on, not out of shame, but because it felt fragile, like a seedling needing quiet to grow. Every evening after work, she'd sit by the window, sketchbook in hand, letting her fingers speak what her mouth couldn't yet say. Characters formed: a little girl in yellow boots, a cap that talked in riddles, a floating city above the clouds. There was no plan, only emotion. It was therapy with lines and color, and somehow more honest than any journal ever could be. This wasn't about talent anymore. It was about breathing again. The silence became her ally. While her ex was still showing off his new relationship on social media, photos of brunches, getaways, gym selfies, she was retreating inward, rediscovering the joy of creation. No one applauded her pages, no one clicked like, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't need an audience. There was peace in the obscurity. It was a different kind of power, one born from stillness rather than noise. She wasn't ready to share her work. But soon, she would be. Soon, the story wouldn't just live inside her. It would have wings. At the community center near her apartment, a small flyer taped to a bulletin board caught her eye: illustration and storytelling workshop, reconnect with your creative voice. It sounded innocent enough, but something about the words made her heart race. She signed up that night, unsure whether she was chasing closure or chasing something new. The first day of the workshop, her hands shook as she opened her sketchbook in front of strangers. But as others shared their fears, some trembling more than she realized she wasn't alone in rebuilding from ruins. The instructor, a man in his 60s with ink-stained fingers and a calm voice, encouraged them to draw their honest line. Not the perfect one, not the impressive one, just the true one. It resonated deeply. When she sketched her little girl in yellow boots again, the instructor paused. "There's something here," he said. "There's weight in this character." She didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so she just nodded. That night, she went home with a rare feeling in her chest. Not joy exactly. Something quieter. Hope. His name was Vincent, and he had once illustrated for major publishers before retiring quietly. Burnout, he confessed during one of their walks after class. "I lost my voice. Took me a decade to get it back." There was no ego in him, no condescension. He looked at her work not as someone critiquing, but as someone searching with her. "You draw pain with softness," he said once, examining a piece. "That's not easy. Don't lose that." She began to crave his feedback, not because she needed validation, but because he understood the silence between the lines. Week after week, her skills sharpened. More importantly, her confidence did too. Vincent lent her books, shared old portfolios, and once even invited her to his studio. It smelled of old paper and cinnamon tea, cluttered with paints and brushes that looked like they'd lived 100 lives. "You have a voice," he told her. "Now find a story that only you can tell." She stared at her latest sketch, her little girl character sitting on a suitcase, looking up at a cloud shaped like a heart. Maybe that story had already begun. It happened unexpectedly. A coworker stopped by her desk one morning, gossip thinly veiled as concern. "Have you seen the news?" she asked. "Your ex and his girlfriend, it's kind of everywhere now." Against her better judgment, she looked. A local lifestyle magazine had featured the couple in a piece titled "Modern Love: Age Gap Relationships That Inspire." There they were, front and center, holding hands and looking perfect. She should have felt crushed. Instead, she felt insulted. What stung wasn't that they looked happy. It was the lie beneath it. The article claimed they'd met by chance at a cafe, failing to mention the affair during his marriage. "We both felt so stuck in our old lives," the new woman said in the interview. "Meeting him reminded me how alive I could feel." That line made her scoff. It wasn't just revisionist history, it was performance. But now, the world saw him as a man of romance and reinvention. Fine. Let them see that. Soon enough, they'd see something else. Something truer. 2 days after the article, she received a message on her old email account, one she barely checked anymore. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I think I owe you the truth." It was from a woman named Celia, one of her ex-husband's former colleagues. The message was long, but one paragraph stood out: "I was there when they first started seeing each other." It wasn't after the separation. It was during. And he lied to a lot of people, not just to you. She sat still, reading it twice. Then a third time. The woman went on to explain how he'd manipulated timelines, telling people the marriage was already over long before it truly ended. "I believed him," Celia wrote. "But after seeing that article, I realized how much harm he caused. If you're ever ready to talk, I'd be glad to meet. I don't expect forgiveness. Just honesty." She stared at the screen, a strange warmth blooming in her chest. Maybe not all bridges needed to be burned. Maybe some were meant to be rebuilt. Not for him, for her. It was Vincent who first suggested it. "Submit your story," he said, tapping the folder with her illustrations. "You're ready." She hesitated, unsure. But he insisted. A small publisher was hosting an open call for debut authors with unique visual storytelling. The theme, resilience. It felt personal. Too personal. But maybe that was the point. She spent 3 nights finalizing her submission, choosing every word and stroke with intention. When she clicked send, her hand trembled, but not from fear. It was release. Weeks passed. Then the email came, "We'd like to meet with you." She stared at the screen, stunned. Her heartbeat roared like a drum. At the meeting, 3 editors sat in a small glass room, flipping through her work silently. Every second felt like an hour. Then, one of them smiled. "There's so much heart in this," she said. "It's rare to find something that feels this raw and yet so full of hope." Another nodded. "We'd like to move forward." She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. But the truth echoed in their eyes. She was no longer just healing. She was becoming. She stood at the podium, her hands slightly shaking as the projector behind her displayed the first page of her book. The publisher had invited her to share the project at a local creative conference, and the room was packed. Artists, editors, writers, and curious strangers sat in silence, watching her. "This story," she began, voice soft but steady, "was born from a time I thought I had nothing left." Eyes locked onto her, not with pity, but reverence. Her pain was no longer something she hid. It was part of her voice. As she walked them through the pages, describing the character's journey from abandonment to self-discovery, she noticed several people wiping tears discreetly. When she reached the last image, a little girl in yellow boots, walking confidently into the sun, applause broke out. It was loud, genuine, and long. After the event, a young woman approached her, eyes red. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your story, it felt like mine." She nodded, heart full. That night, she didn't cry from sadness. She cried from something deeper, validation. Not everything moved forward smoothly. A larger publisher she had dreamed of working with sent a rejection. Too niche, they said. Too quiet. The word stung, not because she needed their approval, but because it reminded her that not everyone saw value in honesty. For a day, she let the rejection settle like cold air. She walked around the city, trying not to let the old doubts creep back in. Was she enough? Was her story too small? But then she remembered the applause. The woman who cried. The child who needed this voice. That same evening, her phone rang. It was the local arts foundation. "We'd like to feature your work at the upcoming gallery event," the coordinator said. "You've touched people in ways we didn't expect." The timing felt poetic, rejection in one hand, opportunity in the other. She smiled to herself, remembering a line from her grandmother's letter, "When one door slams, don't knock. Build your own house." She wasn't chasing approval anymore. She was planting roots in her own soil. The gallery buzzed with quiet awe. Her illustrations, framed and mounted, lined one of the longest walls. Guests stood in front of each piece, reading the captions that told the story of a woman rediscovering her worth. She mingled silently at first, watching from a distance. A small group of children pointed at her character, the girl in the yellow boots, and giggled. One of them turned and said, "Mommy, she looks brave." Her throat tightened with emotion. That little girl wasn't just a character. It was a piece of her heart. Later in the evening, a local journalist approached her. "Your work feels like healing on paper," he said. "Mind if I write a piece about it?" She nodded, still stunned. Then, from across the room, she noticed a familiar face. Celia, the woman who had emailed her, was standing beside the final illustration. Their eyes met. Celia offered a respectful nod, not approaching, just silently witnessing. That quiet presence spoke volumes. There was something sacred about being seen by the right people, in the right moment. Not as the woman who was left, but as the woman who rose. Across town, things weren't as golden as they appeared. Her ex-husband, once riding high on his fresh start, now sat in his new apartment alone. The young woman who had once lit up every room had grown colder, distant. Their social media posts had slowed. The curated smiles had faded. Arguments erupted over small things, timing, priorities, money. He couldn't understand why she no longer laughed at his jokes or why she scrolled through her phone instead of listening to his stories. The fantasy he chased had begun to tarnish. At work, things weren't better. The charm that once won over clients no longer covered his growing reputation for selfishness. A deal fell through. Then another. The office buzzed not with admiration, but doubt. Whispers spread. He looked at himself in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the man looking back. Where had the ease gone? The admiration? The control? He had traded loyalty for novelty, depth for surface, and now, the surface was cracking. And worse still, he knew exactly where he'd gone wrong. The unraveling of his new life happened slowly, then all at once. His latest pitch was rejected by a key investor who once admired him. The reason? "Your reputation has shifted," they said carefully. "We're looking for stability." That word echoed in his mind, stability. The very thing he'd thrown away. His carefully curated image of success began to crumble, and even his closest colleagues started to distance themselves. Whispers behind closed doors became louder. He wasn't a visionary anymore. He was a liability. At home, Eliza was no longer playing the part. The affection had turned transactional. Every conversation was tense, filled with undertones of resentment. "I didn't sign up to babysit your midlife crisis," she said one night, throwing a glass onto the counter. He stared at her, stunned, realizing she no longer saw him as charming or successful, but exhausted and defeated. For the first time, he considered what he had truly lost. And it wasn't just a career or a woman. It was the version of himself that had been built on something real. When the envelope arrived, he thought it was a mistake. His name, written in her handwriting, unmistakable. Inside was an invitation to an art showcase and book release celebration. No bitterness, no sarcasm. Just elegant wording and a date. He stared at it for minutes. Was it a trap? A message? A peace offering? He couldn't tell. But the invitation tugged at something deeper, a curiosity, maybe even guilt. She was hosting an event to launch her children's book. He remembered her sketching once, long ago, but she had always kept it private. He never imagined she'd make it into something. The date approached, and despite telling himself not to go, he found himself adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. He looked older now. Not wiser, just worn. He didn't know what he expected to find at the event, but what he found was far from anything he could have imagined. The venue was packed, vibrant with laughter and warm light. People were standing in line to get books signed. On the far end of the room, she stood, smiling graciously, posing for pictures with children holding her illustrated pages. She glowed, not in a performative way, but in a peace-healing way he could no longer fake. When their eyes met, it was like time paused, but not in the cinematic way he once imagined. There was no tension, no longing, just calm recognition. She smiled gently, as if seeing an old acquaintance, not the man who once held her future. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. No anger, no mockery. Just dignity. That shook him more than any confrontation ever could. He had prepared himself for judgment, but not for grace. That kind of peace, it was unfamiliar now. She introduced him to a few people, editors, mentors, readers. Each one spoke of her brilliance, her journey, her resilience. He nodded, tight-lipped, realizing that her name was no longer attached to his in any of their minds. She stood alone now, not as an extension of anyone, but as her own world. At one point, a little girl tugged on her sleeve. "I love the yellow boots," she said. "She's brave like my mom." His throat tightened. That character had been born from her pain. And now, it inspired others. Including him. Later that evening, he approached her while she stood alone near the refreshments. "Is this really you?" he asked quietly. She turned, smiling. "Yes," she said. "This is who I was before everything. I just lost her for a while." Her voice held no bitterness, only truth. He looked down, guilt flooding every inch of him. "I never saw this in you," he admitted. "I think I didn't want to." She nodded. "You saw what you needed. And I let you. That was on me, too." Her clarity stung, but it was fair. He wanted to say something profound, something redeeming. But all he could manage was, "I'm sorry." She met his gaze steadily. "I know," she said. "And I hope you find peace. But don't look for it in me." With that, she walked away, not with malice, but with strength. She didn't look back. And for the first time, he understood, closure doesn't come from the person you hurt. It comes from facing who you became because of it. Near the end of the night, she was called to the stage for a toast. Holding her glass, she looked out at the crowd, friends, strangers, and the man she once loved. To every version of ourselves that we thought wouldn't survive, she began. To the pieces we lost, and the ones we reclaimed. To the endings that hurt, and the beginnings they made room for. The room quieted as her words soaked in. Her voice didn't tremble. It was steady. Rooted. Whole. People raised their glasses, tears brimming in more than a few eyes. She saw him in the corner, standing still, his expression unreadable. But she didn't speak to him again. She didn't need to. This wasn't about him anymore. This was her story now, uninterrupted, unshaken, fully hers. And in that moment, the final thread tying her to the past quietly dissolved. Not in anger. In release. A week after the event, she received a message late at night. It was from him. "Can we talk?" it read. Simple. Undramatic. But heavy with 1,000 unsaid things. She stared at it for a long time, recalling the man he used to be, the laughter, the cruelty, the absence. Part of her was curious. Another part felt nothing at all. She didn't owe him anything. Not a reply, not her time, not even closure. But something in her, compassion, perhaps, chose not to delete it. She replied the next morning. "I'm available for coffee this Friday. 1 hour." It wasn't about reopening a door. It was about confirming that it should stay closed, but with dignity. When they met, he looked thinner, aged. His eyes searched hers for softness. "I made a mistake," he said quickly, without preamble. "A huge one." She sipped her tea calmly. "I know," she answered. "But that mistake was my gift." He tried to explain himself, his insecurities, the thrill he mistook for love, how he believed leaving would set them both free. She listened without interruption. And when he was done, she placed her cup down. "You didn't just leave me," she said. "You left the version of me you refused to see. You left the woman who supported your dreams, who sat with you in silence when words failed. You left me long before the divorce. I just finally caught up." He looked down, ashamed. "I thought I wanted something else," he muttered. "But now, I see what I had," she cut him off gently. "What you had is gone. And what you thought you wanted never truly existed." He nodded, not defensively, but brokenly. "I just needed to say it." She smiled, not cruelly, but with finality. "And now you have." Then she stood up, leaving him there, not for revenge, but for herself. Walking away from that cafe felt like walking out of an old skin. She didn't cry. Didn't shake. There was no emotional weight left. Just peace. That chapter had finally ended, not with drama or a second chance, but with truth. Her phone buzzed with a message from her editor. "Your book is being translated. Germany, Japan, and Spain want rights." She smiled to herself. The world was expanding, and she was ready. At home, she looked around at the life she had built, quiet, full of color, and free from old ghosts. There were no trophies of pain, only symbols of growth. A dried sunflower on her bookshelf. A postcard from a young reader. The framed drawing from her grandmother's letter. These were her new foundations. Bitterness had no place here anymore. Only gratitude for what broke her and for what rebuilt her. She never once thought about revenge. That was never the point. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was peace. Not the kind that comes when life is perfect, but the kind you earn by walking through fire and choosing not to become it. And now, it lived in her daily life. In her morning routines. In the way she smiled at strangers. In the way she forgave herself for not seeing it sooner. The world had stopped seeing her as the woman who was left. Now, she was the author. The illustrator. The woman with the yellow boot girl. She visited schools, spoke to small audiences, and mentored other women who had also been broken and rebuilt. She didn't need applause anymore. Just meaning. And she had found it, piece by piece, until she no longer felt the need to prove anything, not to him, not to herself, not to anyone. One morning, standing in front of the mirror, she caught her reflection in a new way. Not with scrutiny or regret, but with awe. The woman staring back was someone she hadn't seen in years, strong, radiant, full. She touched the glass softly and whispered, "You made it." Her eyes didn't tear up. She simply smiled. It wasn't about looking younger or more beautiful. It was about looking whole. That evening, as the sun poured golden light through her window, she sketched a new character, an older woman, holding a lantern, walking ahead of a group of children. The caption below read, "There's always light, sometimes, you just have to carry it yourself." She leaned back in her chair, let out a deep breath, and closed her sketchbook. The past was behind her. The light was within her. And the story was only just beginning.